Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Ramya, third year PhD, pharmacology. Today, our topic is about pharmacotherapy of hypertension. What is hypertension? Hypertension is nothing but blood pressure. So, what is blood pressure? Blood pressure is the pressure of the blood, that is flowing blood on the arterial wall. Okay, the pressure that is of the flowing blood on the arterial wall when you measure with a BP machine or what you call as a sphygmomanometer. When you are recording it, that is called as blood pressure. So when do you call it as hypertension? If it is high blood pressure, okay, blood pressure is the pressure of the flowing blood on the arterial wall. So whenever it is high than the normal, it is called as hypertension. It is less than the normal, then it is called as hypotension. So when it is called as hypertension, so according to this classification, we'll see when it is called as stage 1 hypertension, stage 2 hypertension, stage 3 hypertension. Okay. So whenever it is above, okay, we'll have two namings in this: systolic blood pressure and diastolic blood pressure. You might be knowing, we'll write is 120 by 80, or you will be seeing the case sheets in the hospital 120 by 80 or BP 130 by 90, something like that. So whatever is written on the numerator side, that is called as systolic blood pressure, and whatever is written in the denominator is called as diastolic blood pressure. Okay. So if the systolic blood pressure is from 130 to 139, it is called as stage 1 hypertension, and in stage 1 hypertension, the diastolic blood pressure will be around 80 to 89. Okay. Coming to stage 2 hypertension, if the systolic blood pressure is 140 to 159 and the diastolic blood pressure is 90 to 99, then it is called as stage 2 hypertension. Coming to stage 3, now it is also called as, now it is not called as stage 3, it is stage 2 only. But when it is more than, that is systolic blood pressure is more than 160, it is called as stage 2 hypertension, and diastolic blood pressure is above 100. Okay. So you understood what is hypertension? So anything above 130 by 80 is called as hypertension. So generally when the systolic blood pressure is below 80 and diastolic is below 60, you can call it as hypotension. Okay. Coming to physiological variations in blood pressures, like generally these are the blood pressures variations. Okay. At birth, the blood pressure will be around 50 by 30 mm of Hg. Mm of Hg means mercuric. Okay. When you measure it on a sphygmomanometer. In adults, it will be, the normal is around 120 by 80. In old age, the general thing will be about 170 by 90 mm of Hg. Okay. Coming to sex variations, males, it is generally said that males will be having higher blood pressure when compared to that of females before menopause. Okay. Coming to body build, in obese people, it is considered that blood pressure will be little higher than people who are thin. Okay. When your emotions are high, or like when you're angry or when you're very aggressive, in that period you will have high blood pressure. After exercise you will have more blood pressure, after your meals. But when you sleep, during your sleep, your blood pressure will be decreased. So even gravity changes occur with blood pressure. Whenever the gravity, the pressure in the blood vessel below the heart level is increased, while decreases in vessel above the heart level due to effect of gravity. Okay. Coming to lifestyle modifications, what you have to do to modify hypertension. Before starting the antihypertensive, that is, before starting any medical treatment, you have to do certain lifestyle modifications, like you have to reduce weight, you have to attain a body mass index which is less than 25. Okay. In such conditions also, you can maintain your blood pressure. Coming to dietary, like you have to reduce salt. Okay. And you should maintain not more than 2400 mg per day of salt. I know it's difficult to measure salt, but you can decrease the salt intake. You have to adapt a DASH type of dietary plan. What is DASH type? That is rich in fruits and vegetables and less in carbohydrates. Okay. Coming to other things like decrease in alcohol consumption, smoking, and physical activities like brisk walk for at least 30 minutes in a day. So such kind of lifestyle modifications also help along with medical treatment to manage your hypertension. Coming to the medical treatment, that is pharmacotherapy of hypertension. They are antihypertensive drugs. So what is the classification of antihypertensive drugs? In these, we have adrenoceptor antagonists like alpha blockers, beta blockers, both alpha and beta blockers. And coming to central sympatholytic drugs, clonidine, methylopa. I think these drugs are covered by Dr. Sudhir in other class. Okay. Then coming to diuretics like thiazides, high ceiling diuretics, potassium sparing diuretics. These drugs also help in decreasing the blood pressure. Coming to ACE inhibitors, these are angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors like enalapril, lisinopril, ramipril. Then we have angiotensin receptor blockers like losartan and candesartan. Coming to calcium channel blockers like verapamil, diltiazem, nifedipine, and amlodipine. Vasodilators like hydralazine, minoxidil, diazoxide, sodium nitroprusside. Coming to ganglion blockers like trimethophan. Okay, then first we'll talk about angiotensin converting enzyme. So before understanding angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors and angiotensin receptor blockers, we have to understand renin-angiotensin system. Okay. So angiotensinogen, this is an enzyme. So it is converted into angiotensin 1. How this enzyme increases blood pressure, first we'll see. Okay. Angiotensinogen, this enzyme, it is predominantly present in kidney, GIT, and then it enters into lungs through blood circulation, and in the lungs it gets converted into angiotensin 2. Okay. In the circulation, when angiotensin 2 is increased, so when angiotensin 2 is increased, it causes vasoconstriction. So this vasoconstriction, it causes increased peripheral vascular resistance of the arterial walls. Okay. So when the arterial walls are vasoconstricted, that is, when they are constricted, obviously the pressure inside the arteries increases. So there will be increased blood pressure. So this is the main enzyme. Angiotensin 2 is the main enzyme which is causing the increased blood pressure. Similarly, other than vasoconstriction, it is also causing aldosterone secretion, increased aldosterone secretion. So whenever there is increased aldosterone secretion, it is increasing sodium and water retention. So because of sodium and water retention, there is increased blood pressure. So in these two types of mechanisms, they are causing increased blood pressure. Okay. So what we have to do, we have to decrease this enzyme so that the blood pressure also decreases. So what are the drugs which cause the decrease of this angiotensin 2 enzyme? Okay. So first we have a angiotensin converting enzyme. What does this enzyme inhibit? So what does these do? They will inhibit the conversion of angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. Okay. So here these ACE inhibitors are inhibiting the conversion of angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. So whenever there is no increase in angiotensin 2, there will not be increased blood pressure. Okay. What then angiotensin receptor blockers, what are they doing? They are inhibiting the vasoconstriction and also inhibiting the aldosterone secretion. So indirectly, they are not increasing the blood pressure. Okay. So this is how they are decreasing the blood pressure. Okay. So coming to angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors. So renin release. So from here, this angiotensinogen is converted to angiotensin 1 with the help of renin. Okay, then angiotensin 1 is converted to angiotensin 2. So this renin release, it has three mechanisms. First, whenever there is decreased renal perfusion, then a decrease in sodium concentration in distal tube, that is in a nephron of the kidney, then stimulation of beta-1 adrenoreceptors in juxtaglomerular apparatus by norepinephrine and prostacyclin. It's okay if you don't understand all these mechanisms, but if you just remember that this angiotensinogen is converted to angiotensin 1 with the help of renin, that is enough. Okay. So the main mechanism of ACE inhibitors. So ACE inhibitors, they block conversion of angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. Here they act. Okay. They also inhibit the degradation of bradykinin mechanism. They also inhibit aldosterone production and promote sodium and water excretion and potassium retention. Okay. Coming to the examples of ACE inhibitors like captopril, lisinopril. Okay, captopril, it was the first ACE inhibitors. Then enalapril also was discovered. Coming to enalapril, which is a prodrug. Okay, lisinopril, it is also a lysine derivative of enalaprilat, and itself it is a potent angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitor. Okay, in general, all ACE inhibitors like ramipril, benazepril, perindopril, quinapril, fosinopril, moaxipril differ with pharmacokinetics, but they all effectively block conversion of angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. They are used to treat hypertension to decrease the morbidity and mortality in heart failure. So they are particularly used in treating patients with diabetic nephropathy as they decrease proteinuria. Okay. They are also useful in preventing the incidence of diabetic retinopathy in type 1 diabetic patients. Okay, what are the adverse effects of ACE inhibitors? So as it decreases hypertension, that is, as it decreases the blood pressure, the first side effect is hypotension, mainly in sodium depleted patients. In patients who have decreased sodium in them, it may cause hypotension. Okay, it may also cause other effects like dry cough, which may be result due to the presence of bradykinin. Bradykinin, it is an enzyme which is mainly present in the lungs. Okay, coming to other adverse effects like artery stenosis, renal failure. Okay, in patients with renal artery stenosis may develop renal failure. It also ACE inhibitors may also cause hyperkalemia in patients taking potassium sparing diuretics. We'll see what are potassium sparing in diuretics in further slides. Okay. It may also cause angioneurotic edema, which may develop within 3 to 4 days of the therapy and is not dose related. So it may involve accumulation of bradykinin and induction of tissue perfusion, tissue specific antibodies. Okay. AC inhibitors are not teratogenic. That means they do not cross the placenta in first trimester, but if they are continued in the second and third trimester, they may cause fetal hypertension, that is decrease in BP in the fetus. Okay, anuria, decreased in the urine output, and also the renal failure in the fetus. So they should not be continued in the second and the third trimester. Okay. Then reversible minor adverse effects like neutropenia, glucosuria, proteinuria, altered taste, and allergic skin rashes are the other adverse effects of ACE inhibitors. Okay. Coming to angiotensin receptor blockers. So all the physiological effects of angiotensin 2 are antagonized by angiotensin receptor blockers, including the release of aldosterone. Saralasin, it is a drug which inhibits the vasoconstrictor effects of angiotensin. Its responses are particularly seen when the circulating angiotensin 2, that is present. Circulating angiotensin 2 means which is present in the blood circulation levels are low. So it must be given IV, but it is not used nowadays. Okay. Other drugs like losartan, candesartan, valsartan, eprosartan, irbesartan, telmisartan, and olmesartan are some orally active, potent, and specific competitive antagonists of AT1 receptor. These are AT1 receptors are nothing but angiotensin receptors. Okay. EXP3174, it is an active metabolite of losartan. It is nowadays coming into the market. Okay. Coming to drugs like candesartan, eprosartan, irbesartan, losartan, all these drugs, they have metabolites. Okay. They are mainly eliminated by renal. That means they are excreted through urine or through biliary, that is through bile. Okay. Only valsartan has elimination through liver. Coming to adverse effects of ARBs, adverse effects like they can cause fetal toxicity. So these also should be discontinued from second trimester like ACE inhibitors. They may precipitate renal failure in patients with renal artery stenosis. Okay. They also can cause hyperkalemia in patients with renal failure. Coming to calcium channel blockers. Okay. Classification of calcium channel blockers. In calcium channel blockers, we have dihydropyridines and non-dihydropyridines. These are based on the structures like dihydropyridines, non-dihydropyridines, based on their structures, which is not much important to you. Okay. Based on their mechanism of action, like whether they are acting, whether they are short acting or long acting, they are divided into ultra short acting like clevidipine, short acting like nifedipine, nicardipine, nimodipine, intermediate acting like nisoldipine, cilnidipine, nirindipine, isradipine, and long acting like amlodipine. Non-dihydropyridines like short acting like verapamil and diltiazem, long acting like bepredil. Okay. First, we'll learn about dihydropyridine group of calcium channel blockers. In this, we have nifedipine. Nifedipine, this is short acting. It will be in a capsular form, which is the first calcium channel blocker, but it is linked with poor outcomes due to abrupt vasodilation. Okay. So extended release formulations of nifedipine are now used for treatment of hypertension. Extended release means slowly they are released. Okay. So sudden vasodilatation will not occur. So sudden fall in BP will not occur in extended, when you give extended release formulation. Okay. Antihypertension dose is 10 to 40 mg BD orally. Okay. Adverse effects like headache, flushing, peripheral ankle edema, Okay, other side effects like tachycardia, reversible gingival hyperplasia on prolonged use. Okay, coming to amlodipine. This can be given orally. It has lesser first pass metabolism, so bioavailability is consistent. The dose will be around 5 to 10 mg orally. The contraindication is unstable angina, left ventricular failure, aortic stenosis, and obstructive cardiomyopathy. Felodipine, it has longer T-half and greater vascular selectivity than nifedipine. Cilnidipine, it is approved to treat hypertension and it is renoprotective. That means it can be also be given in patients with renal failure. Okay. Coming to nicardipine, it is highly vasoselective drug. It has a greater greater effect on coronary dilatation with lesser effect on cardiac contractility. So it is approved for both hypertension and angina. Dose will be around 30 to 60 mg BD orally. Coming to nimodipine, it is highly lipid soluble and it crosses blood-brain barrier. It shows higher affinity and selectivity for cerebral blood flow, cerebral blood vessels. So it can be used in migraine. Okay. It has reduced morbidity following subarachnoid hemorrhage. As it crosses blood-brain barrier, it can be used in subarachnoid hemorrhage. Coming to non-dihydropyridine group of calcium channel blockers. In this, we have verapamil and diltiazem. Coming to verapamil, this shows cardiac depressant effects like decrease in heart rate, conduction velocity, and contractility. So this verapamil, it has more depressant effects on heart when compared to diltiazem. So it possesses a non-specific alpha-adrenergic blocking action, which may also contribute to peripheral vasodilation. It is approved to treat mild to moderate hypertension. So dose will be around 120 mg BD or 80 mg thrice a day. Okay, orally only. Adverse effects will be mainly constipation, contraindications like AV conduction defects and heart failure. Verapamil, it inhibits P-glycoprotein and increases blood digoxin levels. This point is not that much important for you. Okay, coming to diltiazem, it is less potent coronary and peripheral vasodilator when compared to that of nifedipine and verapamil. Decrease in contractility is lesser when compared to that of verapamil. Dose is 60 to 120 mg or BD orally and can be maximized up to 360 mg per day. Coming to diuretics. Diuretics also, they decrease the blood pressure by depleting the body sodium stores. Okay. Diuretics, they are effective by lowering the blood pressure by 10 to 15 mmHg in most patients, and diuretics alone often provide adequate treatment. So in severe hypertension, diuretics are used in combination with sympatholytic as well as vasodilator drugs. Coming to thiazide diuretics. Thiazide diuretics, what do we have? Hydrochlorothiazide, chlorothiazide, and indapamide are the generally used drugs. Okay, chlorothiazide is not very lipid soluble, but it must be given relatively in larger doses. So it is the only thiazide available for parenteral administration. Dose is around 0.5 to 2 grams orally in 2 divided doses. Hydrochlorothiazide is more potent and should be used in much lower doses. Okay. The dose of hydrochlorothiazide is around 25 to 100 mg once daily orally. Coming to chlorthalidone, it has longer duration of action and is absorbed slowly. So dose is around 25 to 50 mg once daily. Indapamide is more potent and longer acting and possesses some intrinsic activity also. It reduces blood pressure at lower doses and causes less hypokalemia. Dose is around 2.5 to 10 mg. Coming to loop diuretics. These diuretics, they primarily act on thick ascending loop of Henle by inhibiting sodium potassium chloride co-transport carrier in the luminal membrane. You will understand about these diuretics after you have a class on diuretics. Okay. Examples of loop diuretics are furosemide, bumetanide, torsemide, and indocrinone. Doses you don't have to remember, but bumetanide around 0.5 to 2 mg, torsemide around 5 to 20 mg, furosemide around 20 to 80 mg. They are preferred in severe hypertension with cardiac and renal insufficiency. Okay, the loop diuretics are rapidly absorbed and they are eliminated by glomerular filtration and tubular secretion. So the most important indication for loop diuretics, it includes acute pulmonary edema and other edematous condition. Okay, the effect of fluid overload will serve as an effective antihypertensive agent. Adverse effects of loop diuretics include hypokalemic metabolic acidosis. Increased sodium delivery leads to increased secretion of potassium H plus causing metabolic acidosis. Other adverse effects like ototoxicity, hyperuricemia, hypomagnesemia, allergic and other skin reactions, eosinophilia are rare. Okay. Coming to potassium sparing diuretics, they are usually given in combination with thiazide diuretics to avoid excessive excretion or depletion of potassium. So they prevent potassium secretion by antagonizing effects of aldosterone on collecting tubules. They reduce sodium absorption in collecting ducts and tubules. Coming to example of potassium sparing diuretics, spironolactone. Spironolactone is a potassium sparing diuretic. It has an active metabolite like canrenone and 7-alpha spironolactone, which are produced in liver and they have longer half-lives, around 14 hours. Eplerenone is another potassium sparing diuretic, which is less effective on androgen receptors and has fewer adverse effects. Adverse effects of potassium sparing diuretics include hyperkalemia, because there is decreased excretion of potassium. Potassium sparing diuretics means potassium is spared, no? So potassium is spared, because of which it results in hyperkalemia. Gynecomastia, then acute renal failure, kidney stones, hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis. These are the adverse effects. Okay. Coming to beta blockers. Beta blockers are proved to be effective antihypertensive agents in mild to moderate hypertension. Okay. The mechanism by which they produce reduction in blood pressure in patients with essential hypertension is reduction in heart rate and myocardial contractility, resulting in decreased cardiac output due to blockade cardiac beta 1 receptor, then reduced renin secretion due to blockade of beta 1 receptors in juxtaglomerular apparatus, then reduction in central sympathetic outflow by blocking presynaptic beta receptors centrally, stimulation of prostacyclin synthesis in vascular beds, blockade of peripheral presynaptic beta 1 receptors to reduce norepinephrine release, increase in natriuretic peptide secretion caused by beta blockade. Okay. Coming to examples of beta blockers. Propranolol, it was the first beta blocker shown to be effective in hypertension. Now it has been replaced by cardioselective beta blockers like metoprolol and atenolol. Beta blockers are specially useful in preventing reflex tachycardia, which is produced by direct vasodilators. Propranolol decreases blood pressure primarily by decreasing cardiac output. It also inhibits the stimulation of renin production. Although most effective in patients with high plasma renin, activity of propranolol also reduces hypertension in patients with normal or low plasma renin activity. In mild to moderate hypertension, it produces a significant reduction in blood pressure. Coming to metoprolol and atenolol, these are cardioselective and most widely used antihypertensives. Metoprolol causes less bronchial constriction than propranolol. It has short half-life of 4 to 6 hours. Bioavailability is around 40%. The initial dose is about 50 to 100 mg. Okay. Atenolol is extensively metabolized and excreted in urine, which has plasma half-life of around 6 hours. The usual dose is 50 to 100 mg and given only once daily. It is less effective than metoprolol in preventing complications. Coming to other drugs like nadolol, cardiolol, betaxolol, bisoprolol, these drugs are administered once daily. Labetalol, another cardioselective drug, it has both beta blocking and vasodilating effects. So it is useful in treating both hypertension of pheochromocytoma and hypertension emergencies. The oral dose is around 200 to 2400 mg. Okay, it is given as repeated IV bolus injections of 20 to 80 mg to treat hypertensive emergencies. Coming to carvedilol, it is administered as a racemic mixture. It is metabolized in the liver. Average T half is around 7 to 10 hours. The usual starting dose for ordinary hypertension is 6.25 mg twice daily. It reduces mortality in patients with heart failure. So, therefore, it is used particularly in hypertension and also heart failure. Coming to alpha blockers like prazosin, terazosin, and doxazosin, they produce most of their antihypertensive effects by selectively blocking alpha-1 receptors in arterioles and venules. They are more effective when used with a beta blocker and a diuretic. Retention of salt and water occurs when they are administered without a diuretic. Okay, so diuretic should also be given along with alpha blocker. So terazosin and doxazosin, they have longer duration of action than prazosin. T half of prazosin is around 3 to 4 hours and usual dose is about 3 mg per day. Terazosin has T half of 12 hours with usual dose of 5 to 20 mg. Doxazosin has 22 hours with usual dose of 4 mg. Long-term treatment of alpha blocker causes relatively little postural hypertension. The beneficial effects in men with prostatic hyperplasia and bladder obstruction symptoms are seen. So these drugs are used primarily, these drugs means alpha blockers. They are used primarily in men with concurrent hypertension and in benign prostatic hyperplasia. The reported toxicity of alpha blockers are infrequent and mild. So they include dizziness, palpitations, and headache. Coming to the last group of drugs, they are vasodilators. So vasodilators, they're also referred as direct vasodilators because the vasodilation which is produced by them, they neither depend on the innervation of the vasculature nor they are mediated through the receptors. Okay, the vasodilators, what do they do? They decrease the total peripheral resistance, of the vessels, and thus lower the blood pressure irrespective of the etiology of the hypertension. Okay, the majority of the vasodilators, except that of sodium nitroprusside, they relax the arterial smooth muscle to a greater extent than the venous smooth muscle, and they do not exhibit the sympathetic reflex. Okay. Coming to arteriolar vasodilators, they include hydralazine, minoxidil, diazoxide, phenoldiazepam. Okay, hydralazine and minoxidil are used orally for long-term outpatient therapy of hypertension. Diazoxide and phenoldiazepam are given parenterally to treat hypertension emergencies. These are usually administered in combination with a diuretic and a beta blocker. Okay, triple combination means arteriolar vasodilator along with a beta blocker. They are used to decrease cardiac output. To decrease plasma volume, it is used along with a diuretic. To decrease total peripheral resistance, it is used along with the vasodilator drug. Okay. Coming to hydralazine. Hydralazine, it is an arterial or vasodilator. It is well absorbed orally, but it undergoes first pass metabolism. So the maximum response, it comes within 30 minutes to 1 hour, and its duration of effects, it lasts for about 6 hours. This drug is accumulated in the arterial walls, where even after stopping of the drug, the effect of this drug stays in the body. Okay. Where even when the plasma concentration declines, the vasodilator effect is still present. Okay. Hydralazine 25 to 50 mg BD orally is generally preferred dose for moderately hypertension ambulatory patients, means patients who are able to move, walk, such kind of patients in whom BP is not effectively controlled either by a diuretic or by a beta blocker. In such kind of patients, you can give hydralazine. Okay. Adverse effects of hydralazine are associated with vasodilation and reflects the hemodynamic changes which occur in response to vasodilation. They include like tachycardia, nausea, nasal congestion, anginal attack due to tachycardia. So on prolonged use of hydralazine, in higher doses, it causes reversible disseminated lupus erythematosus-like syndrome. Other drugs like minoxidil, this is effective orally. It is more potent and long-acting vasodilator than hydralazine. Maximum response comes within 1 to 2 hours, but antihypertensive effect lasts for 12 to 24 hours. Plasma half-life of 4 hours. Okay, it is primarily metabolized by liver and is not accumulated in patients with renal failure. The major indications for the use of minoxidil are severe hypertension that may be life-threatening, or hypertension which is associated with chronic renal failure, or hypertension that is resistant to other form of the therapies. Adverse effects of minoxidil include like headache, nasal congestion, tachycardia, precipitation of anginal attacks due to reflex sympathetic activity. A more troublesome side effect is hirsutism, that is hair growth in areas where it generally should not grow in females, okay, because it activates a specific gene that regulates their hair shaft protein, like in areas like upper lip, beard area in females. If there is hair growth, it is uncomfortable, right? It is called hirsutism. Okay, this is more troublesome side effect. So as it is causing hair growth, minoxidil, it is now marketed as a stimulant of hair growth for correcting male type of baldness. Coming to diazoxide, it is related to a thiazide diuretic, but it causes sodium water retention instead of diuresis. It lowers BP within 3 to 5 minutes after rapid IV injection. So slow IV injection or infusion is less effective as the drug exhibits rapid and extensive protein binding. It is metabolized by both liver and kidney. T-half is around 20 to 45 hours. Okay, diazoxide is used for the treatment of hypertensive emergencies such as malignant hypertension, encephalopathy, and eclampsia. It is frequently administered along with a diuretic and a beta blocker. Since it is not meant for a long-term therapy, toxicities are very less. Coming to arteriolar plus venous dilators. Okay, that is, they dilate both arteries and veins. Example is sodium nitroprusside. It is also called as a nitrovasodilator as it releases nitroxide. It is powerful when it is administered parenterally. Vasodilator, it dilates both arterial and venous blood vessels, resulting in decrease in peripheral vascular resistance and in venous rhythm. So the onset of hypotensive effect is rapid, that is within 30 seconds after IV infusion, and disappears within 10 minutes after stoppage of this drug. So it is administered as IV infusion for the treatment of hypertension emergencies. In hypertensive crisis, which is not accompanied with heart failure, it decreases blood pressure without affecting the cardiac output. In patients with refractory heart failure, even in the absence of hypertension, it improves ventricular performance by reducing preload and afterload. Okay. Sodium nitroprusside has a special place in the treatment of severe hypertension and acute myocardial infarction or left ventricular failure. The aqueous solution of sodium nitroprusside, they are unstable and they are sensitive to light. So these solutions, they should be made up fresh before each administration, and the bottle should be covered by a black paper. Adverse effects of sodium nitroprusside are headache, nausea, and vomiting. They disappear after infusion is stopped. Okay. Serious toxicity can occur due to accumulation of cyanide and thiocyanate. Administration of sodium thiosulfate and hydroxycobalamin can be used to trap this cyanide ions, and this toxicity and accumulation of cyanide and thiocyanate can be reduced. Okay. So what are the nursing indications you have to do to treat hypertension? You have to explain them the lifestyle modifications, like to reduce weight, to do walking or any physical activity for at least 30 minutes in a day, and to take fruits, that is to follow DASH type of diet, that is more of fruits and vegetables and less of carbohydrates, then to restrict salt, all these indications. And in the hospital area, you have to be accurate, that is you have to check the blood pressure at least 3 times, morning in hypertensive patients or in ICU at least 3 times in a day, morning, evening, and night, or whatever the doctor advises. Sometimes in ICU, you will be checking BP every hour. Okay. Based on the treatment given by the doctor, you will be giving the injections or the oral treatments. Okay. If the patient is complaining of any symptoms like sweating or giddiness, check BP. It may be sometimes hypotension. Okay. These kind of complaints should be carefully managed. Okay, thank you.